Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the first in our webinar series where we're going to be discussing our new research report, which will be fully out at the end of the year, which is called The Future of Home According to Gen Z. Firstly, I think Sarah and I just want to say this is a really, really big day for us. I think independently, and when we started working together, we knew the sector needed this kind of research and have needed it for a very long time. We've taken a long in-depth look at all the things that kind of impact the home and kind of PBSA and BTR. And we've surveyed over 2,500 participants in a cohort of 16 to 17-year-olds, current students and graduates to really kind of understand what they want from their future home. We have a lot of data. We're still working through all of it. And as I say, the full report will be available at the end of the year. But we have, because we've got so much data, we're splitting this up into special themes around kind of got 5 pillars of sustainability, affordability, well-being, community and technology, of which sustainability is the first one that we want to discuss today. We can't believe that this day has finally come, that we've got to make this research happen and we got to share it with you all. And we really want to say a massive big thank you to our partner UPP for sharing our vision and helping us to make it a reality. So thank you to all the team there. As I said, today we're going to be focusing about sustainability. It's a really important topic, and I think from our findings we'll see that kind of the current cost of living crisis is impacting on kind of how young people want to be sustainable, but how much they can be sustainable. So we'll talk a bit more about that. Before we move to introduce our panel today, we also want to say a big massive thank you to LOFT and Benjamin for sponsoring this session and our sustainability pillar. Thank you very much. We love LOFT for its overt sustainability focus. Everything they do focuses on kind of their end goal, and also its passion for delivering excellent spaces for the residential sector. So a big thank you to LOFT for supporting. So before we get on to kind of the topic and the discussion, we just want to go around all of our guests and let them introduce themselves and what they do. Benjamin, I will start with you.
Hi, my name's Benjamin Hall. I'm the founder and MD at LOFT. We provide interior design and furnishing solutions for the residential property sector. My father, when I was younger, had a second-hand furniture business. So sort of reusing and recycling furniture is part of our DNA in the business. And when Sarah and the property marketing strategists approached us to sort of get involved with this sustainability pillar, it fit with all of our values and our mission. And yeah, really excited to be here. And I think the report's really insightful. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ben. Brendan? Oh,
Hi, I'm Brendan Geraghty. I am the CEO of the UKAA, which represents the built-to-rent industry. And it's a very quickly growing industry, expected to become a very big player in the residential space. I'm an architect by training, so I have designed a lot of these buildings, and of course net zero carbon sustainability is absolutely essential to the built environment, how we design and manage and operate our buildings. So I'll be talking from that perspective.
Thank you. And Rosanna?
Hi everyone, my name is Rosanna Lawn. I am a consultant within the built environment, focusing specifically on technology, real estate and ESG, and how these 3 elements come together and how they're going to be integrated further as we move forward in the future. Working with NGOs like the UK BCSD, looking at their member offering, helping drill down and simplify all of the accreditation that's out there and all of these guidelines, trying to help drive a more simplified and united built environment. In that sense, working with new tech companies that are coming to the market who don't speak the same language as our real estate friends, as well as working with real estate companies who are focused on sustainability, but they really just don't know where to start, looking at how we can ESG audit buildings, et cetera, and just start to, really pick up how we integrate sustainability in a meaningful way within the built environment.
That's great, thank you. And Jason?
Hi, I'm Jason Clarke, and I am the Head of Energy and Environment for UPP. That's the University Partnerships Programme. And prior to that, I was worked in the higher education sector for quite a while now. And at UPP, what we're really trying to do is look at how our offer, or how the homes, the accommodation that we provide for young people, what it needs to be in the future, and how can it meet those needs. And sustainability is one of the key needs for young people moving forward, and it's something that they're very interested in. So if we can build that into our offer, and through research like this, will help us to do that.
And Michelle?
Hi everybody, my name's Michelle Carvill. I am championing sustainable marketing. I wrote a book called Sustainable Marketing: How to Drive Profits with Purpose. I run a digital agency and have been in marketing for a long time. So I'm on a mission through our Can Marketing Save the Planet podcast to educate and support marketers and communicators in driving a more responsible and sustainable marketing and communication agenda.
Great, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. A great panel. Just to say to those watching, if you want to put any questions to the panel, please do so on the Q&A, and we will do our best to get to those. If you put them in the chat, we might miss them. And I will pass over to Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you all. And we're going to dive straight in because we've got so much to get through this afternoon. First thing that I want to pose to you is, we've seen a lot in kind of conferences and webinars about the built environment industry, and how many leaps and bounds really have been made regarding the build and meeting those accreditations that you spoke about, Rosanna. But have we got the balance right, and what actually impacts the customer beyond the actual building requirements? Who would like to take that? Jason, I'm just going to pick on you. You're on mute.
Sorry, can you just rephrase that again? I missed the start of it for some reason.
Yeah, saying that I guess there's a big difference between accreditation from a build point of view and all of the requirements that have to be met, versus what actually impacts the customer. And have we got that balance right?
Yeah, I think we've got a way to go. I think the accreditations and are very, and I think Rosanna mentioned it earlier on in her introduction, the myriad accreditations that there are, and trying to meet those requirements is often at the front of a developer's mind, and not what living in that space and being part of that space for a period of time, for a very important and impressionable part of your life could be. And I'm speaking specifically about academic accommodation or students accommodation. So we did a little while ago, we had an exercise where we invited a number of architectural partnerships to develop or design what should be the future of student accommodation moving forwards. And one of the things that was picked up in there was around issues of circularity. So the idea of, and it comes out in your report where you've mentioned about, secondhand furniture and so on and things like that. And that was something which came out very strongly in the winning design, the idea of centering reuse and within the design of a space. And they're some of the things which are responding to requests from students to be able to, because we have a major issue, which is at the end of tenancy, that you get a huge amount of, there's a lot to recycle at the end of tenancy with students. And if we can try and build that circularity into the way that we design our spaces and at the heart of our spaces, that's responding to what is being requested by students. And that isn't picked up in a lot of the different criteria that are used in that are more at the forefront of the minds of developers. So I think there is a bit of a distance between the design and actually the living in the spaces and the requirements of the young people who are living in those spaces.
Just to add to that, I think this is where like the triangle of ESG can really come into play. I've got a really good colleague of mine who started a company called Life Proven, and that focuses on the S, so the social side of ESG. And the driver for that is he was working on, as a development director, on designing and delivering a student accommodation block. And by the time they designed it, against all the accreditation, you know, all of these things were fine. They actually the review and the feedback on the designs was, we have a really high suicide rate at a university, and these designs will not help with that wellness factor. These designs will actually probably have a negative effect on this suicide rate that we have at this university because of the way that it's designed. And he was kind of like, wait, like, what do you mean? And he dove into all of the background and started really looking into how things like space and how things like lighting and like window positions and all these different things affect them, you know, our mental health, and actually how much that impacts the students, which therefore he started the company Life Proven, which uses data-driven information and platforms to try and assess from a design and build position or phase within that process, is this going to be negative for the wellness of the students? And I know the S isn't really what we're focusing on today, or the wellness, but it is a huge factor in sustainability as well, social wellness.
Just to pick up on that, I think there's I think it's great that pulling out those factors around wellness and how they do become much more integrated into the way that we think about sustainability. When you're looking at student accommodation, there's often a focus on intensity. So ensuring that you can meet the building intensity to ensure that you can generate the financial returns that you require from that space. And it's often the case, and this is talking about mental health and well-being, that finding ways to meet that intensity whilst providing the spaces that are required and the sort of spaces that are required to give people a feeling of being together but apart, if you get what I mean by that, to be able to get away and not be on top of each other all at the time. And that is the sort of thing which was, when we were looking at the future of student accommodation, that was another theme which came out very strongly, that importance of wellbeing. And I think that's been highlighted by what we've just all been through, but it is something that really does need to be built into designs away from your BREEAMs and all of that sort of stuff, which don't really pick that up.
Brendan, can I just ask your take on it from a build to rent point of view, that kind of balance between building regulations and living and breathing it as a customer?
Look, I think the comments that have been made are very valid. I mean, you know, the background to this is that the briefs that are given to architects who create student buildings and build to rent buildings is just simply are incomplete. The drivers are financial by and large, and that's because it costs a huge amount of money to build buildings. I mean, it is a costly enterprise. So a lot of that focus is there. But the other side of this is that, and very often it's be compliant, and compliant doesn't necessarily translate to a good experience. The fact of the matter is that we experience our buildings on the inside, and getting that interior experience to work well and be beneficial and all the things that you described takes a great deal of thinking about. But we have some structural issues in our development process. Basically, the planning process is a tough thing to get through. There isn't any focus on the internal environment to speak of, really, if we're honest with ourselves. It's all about the exterior and whether it fits into the townscape. Don't get me wrong, that's important. But the interior experience is generally worked out once the building has got through planning. And in my experience, and this is now moving forward to build to rent, if you don't bake it in at planning, it ain't going to get in. And what I see going forward is that what is submitted at planning is going to have to be more sophisticated, more complete from a user experience, from a well-being experience, from a general sustainability perspective. And the other side of this as well is that buying a badge is going to only take you so far down the road. I think the whole sustainability agenda requires individual choices to be made, individual actions and behaviors to be measured. So we can look at BREEAM, or we can look at the well-building requirements and all of that kind of thing, and they're going to answer a bunch of questions. but every building is unique, every building owner is unique, and every building resident is unique, and they have responsibility too of creating those more specific points of evaluation in how the performance of the building will be. Build to Rent is looking at all of that now and looking to drive that interior, the understanding of the customer experience and the value of that into our development process, and hopefully we will improve as things go forward.
Don't you think on that basis as well, and this is something I feel very passionate about, I feel like as built environment experts, we have failed our own consumer in helping educate them how to live a more sustainable life, helping educate tenants, be it office tenants or students, how to effectively get the most out of their building once all these technologies are installed, once they're designed in a certain way. We fail in delivering that message in a way that they understand so that they can operate the building to the best of its ability. Our handover sessions, our handover briefs, our handovers are never sufficient enough to give them the power to make the right decisions for the building that they're living in.
I think
that's a really good point. But if you go back a step and go through the entire construction process, that's where the majority of the sort of environmental impact comes in. And I don't know whether the guys that are actually constructing these buildings are actually sort of whether they're, sort of inducted properly either with the amount of waste that they create or the amount of carbon emissions that they make. I mean, living within a building can be improved and measured really easily, especially with tech. Brendan was at the BizNow conference recently, and there's a lot of talk about measuring residents' sort of behavior within a building and becoming the most eco-friendly resident. But the construction companies, if you go all the way back to when they break ground and the amount of sort of emissions and environmental impact and waste and all of the, delivering the materials to the site and concrete and metal and wood and everything that goes into building a building, I think we need to, there's a lot that needs to be spoken about at that point too.
Michelle, just want to kind of throw this back at you from a marketing perspective. How, I guess you can probably conclude this discussion is, how much from a build point of view do you think can be marketed to residents versus kind of their ongoing lifestyle within the buildings once they're constructed? What do you think would make an impact from a buying perspective, really?
I think it goes back to what Ben was just saying about how the building is actually constructed and the components that go into the building at that point, and that there being a responsibility by the construction organization or the brand that is building that particular building to make sure that everything in their supply chain is as it needs to be, so that when they're then marketing the building, it's not a version of the truth, it's just the truth. This is what we've done, this is how much carbon is emitted, this is a truly green building. And then it starts to, for people looking for a greener environment to live in, everybody's becoming more aware about how this is the climate and the impact of what's going on with climate change is impacting the way we behave, the way we live. So then the communication piece, which is, as Rosanna was talking about, is that handover then as to how you operate and how you live in that building should ideally be kind of aligned with how they would want to live anyway, because one would hope that you've done the kind of research and you're building buildings that actually are desirable by people, that aren't just about meeting the bottom line. Of course, that's an important factor, but it is about balancing that people, planet, profit triangle at the same time. So I think that if you construct it right, and you've got ethical, environmental elements going on that are beyond the badges, because I mean, when we talk about consumerism, there are 455 different accreditations, green labels, badges. I'm talking about generally. Most of them don't mean anything to the end user at all, and most of them don't mean anything. You're just buying a kite mark. You're paying to be in there. So there's no real trust or credibility in a lot of that. So I think that it comes back to being that responsible, which goes back, I think this is very joined up to what Brendan was saying, whereas, you've got to have that integrity that I'm taking responsibility for what I'm building. Yes, there are the badges and the claims, but actually I'm going above and beyond because this is a true green building. And now it's going to align with the needs of our audience, which is marketing 101. And then when you're communicating how to live and how this is a better environment, it's kind of already aligned with how people are thinking and feeling, because that's why they've chosen that building, because they want to live a better, cleaner, more environmentally valuable life. And you, as the facilitator of all of that, have facilitated them to be able to do that. So there's more buy-in from them, and in an ideal world, it becomes a kind of win-win-win situation.
Yeah, the headline that they all know is that 40%, or I think it's 39% of all greenhouse emissions are building and construction globally. Yeah. So if that 40% is a pretty solid 40% of what's, clearly damaging the environment, what is being done, by the construction companies to reduce that, and then that in turn, if they can sort of prove what they've done, then the people that will live within that building will be living there for a choice, and then they will choose to live more sustainably, do their recycling, turn their lights off when they leave the room, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you're both right. First and foremost, you're both right. But this is also a journey. It may be an urgent journey, but it's still a journey. And there's a technology piece here, and there's a kind of how far have we got down this journey. And I'm not making excuses for the construction sector, because my goodness, they do need to get a move on here. But to your original point, brand in residential real estate is not really that established. Maybe a little bit in student world, but certainly in build to rent and other. There's no consumer facing brands. There's lots of business to business brands, but a brand as we would know it for a consumer product doesn't really exist. I had a concept that I launched a few years ago, which is brand before building, which is understand the ideas behind the building before you design the damn thing. But it's we can see brand now coming in to the process. But two things are happening. The market is greening, and Gen Z are showing that, but also finance is greening. And unfortunately, they're greening at different speeds. Now, ESG is forcing the financial world to make demands on that on the industry, and my goodness, it's a tsunami coming towards us. But the industry is moving quickly, perhaps not quick enough. But to give you some context, it's generally accepted that we now know how to design a net zero building in use, i.e., your use within the building will be net zero. That's recent. That's not a couple of years ago. We haven't just done it. That's now, and we now need to apply that. The real issue is going to be embedded carbon and recycling and furniture and that sort of thing. Is, to my mind, a really fantastic way of showing the importance of that and how it can be done. But embodied carbon in construction, whether it be in steel or reinforced concrete or bricks, I've got a tremendous embodied carbon in them. We have to unpick this stuff now. Luckily, we have a model. We have FSC timber, which everybody will understand. The world got together, governments got together, and we started to regulate how we dealt with timber. And now we need to do the same again, but with carbon. But it's going to be a lot more complicated, and it's going to take time for the construction industry to actually deliver.
I think, Brendan, just this is to do with what Jason said, Brendan and Rosanna as well, is the architectural competition that you spoke about before, Jason. I was there and saw the presentations, and what struck me is there's some really, really innovative ideas coming forward. So with the combination of, for example, biophilia in buildings, students in our research showed that actually they've got an interest in growing their own produce and vegetables and composting. You've then got kind of sustainable factors in the build, but also in the building through kind of, the way that buildings are heated and stuff. Surely that will indicate a whole new expertise level that we just don't have within the industry at the moment. I mean, we, in rented buildings, we have maintenance people, but surely they're not skilled enough yet to be able to, I don't know, manage a whole new heating system, or even, landscapers being able to kind of successfully plant plants that are in season, that are in the right place, that can be maintained and looked after. All of that combined with what you just spoke about, Brendan, is that just going to make the cost of buildings increase and be passed on to young people? Because in our research, young people were very, very clear about the fact that they do not want to pay for sustainability.
I don't think anybody wants to pay for sustainability, unfortunately, although we probably need to. Yeah, that's a real issue, and it does put cost on, but we're in a transition. Eventually that cost will decrease, but we have to allow it to be expensive and then allow it to become cheaper. And we can't get to cheaper, more affordable solutions until we start, because it's all new. So we have to start somewhere, and when you start anything like this, which is innovative, the prototypes always cost more.
From our point of view as a student accommodation provider, it's a very difficult sell for us to say, you can live in this accommodation, but it'll be more expensive because it's sustainable. That's not a position that we can really take. So we have to find a way of knowing that, you know, it's almost a lost leader. We know that we have to do these things, and we have to find a way of integrating that into the payment structures for students moving into student housing, but not penalizing them for it, because as your research shows, and my research of speaking to students as I've gone through, they consider this as something that it's a given. It should be a given that your space that you move into should be sustainable. It shouldn't be an add-on. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I think it's quite important that that this goes back to your point, Sarah, about the competition that we had, is that we concentrate a lot on carbon, and obviously we concentrate on carbon because it is at the forefront in terms of climate change and so on. But in terms of the things that engage students or engage young people around sustainability, carbon and energy isn't the first one. Climate change is things around materials, things around food, things around again around well-being, around all of those sorts of elements are often the trigger that enables you to get younger people thinking about, you know, sustainability as a whole and building that into, and you know, so we have to find a way to it not just be energy, carbon. We spoke a bit about embedded carbon and so on, and a lot of, you know, people, I think a lot of young people are aware of that, but whether it actually gets them changing their behavior because of the embodied carbon during construction, I would not say that that is necessarily the case.
I also think, Jason, because I totally agree with that, but I think the industry is really struggling and we have to start somewhere, don't we, to then build upon. But I think the other thing is taking that information that is boring and turning it into something that's relatable. So, you know, by living in this house, it's the equivalent of, or this room is equivalent of planting X amount of trees a year. Like, start talking to them in a way that they understand the language. Or, you know, when you book a flight with Ryanair now, you can offset your whole travel with Ryanair, and people are seeing this all the time. And whilst we don't want to be a huge advocate for offsetting, sometimes it is just a means to an end on top of all the other sustainability things that are going on. So it's utilizing that information and turning it into something interesting. So they might go, oh, actually, you know what, that's really cool, or this is really cool, or actually I didn't realize that, or I've learned something new today. And I think it's all around languaging, and you know, Michelle will probably pipe up in a second on this, but it's all around marketing and how we connect with that consumer and what they care about.
Agree. I mean, I agree with all of that, and it is about how we communicate. You know, there's so many beautiful different reports coming out and wonderful books about inspiring green consumer choices and how we communicate in that way, so that is relatable, because numbers and you're saving tons of this, and you know, it just goes over the head. Going back to the point though about it being affordable, and that most students are saying that it should be a given. It should be a given. And this is the challenge for, you know, in the pre-chat there that Benjamin was talking about, is how we measure success and how we measure value and how we measure what profit for an organization actually looks like at the moment. And I think it you know, this is where we've got some major challenges, because organizations are just going to have to take a hit to get this right, because it is going to have to require urgent transition. Because nobody's going to be living anywhere, you know, if we don't have a healthy planet. And so it is urgent transition that is required for sustainable living in any way, shape or form for all of us. And so organizations are just going to have to take the hit. And the huge profit margins may not be huge for a few years until we drive a more, as Brenda was saying, it will eventually flatten out. But initially, it's not going to be the consumer that needs to take that hit. It should be the organizations.
And the kids are gonna ask, where's this money coming from?
Absolutely, yeah.
And the thing is, the answer to that question is, it's a lot of the time, especially with build to rent, it's pension fund money.
Yeah.
So if that's our money, then you've got to be spending it responsibly. So your return on that, basically, it's not about a capital return. It's about making sure that we're working with the planet to make sure that we're not damaging it by building homes for people. But it's crazy, because when you actually, I've got a lot of young people at Loft, and they want to know where the money comes from, and they want to know who's developing the building, and they want to know how and why. And I think the pension funds are going to become under huge amounts of scrutiny. I went to the CogX conference at King's Cross recently, and the head of levelling up was there from L&G, and you know, he threw the H into the ESHG, and the health aspect of environment and social governance is the measure. And you know, people's health within the development, within the surrounding area of the development, and it is the responsibility of that pension fund and that developer. And they will see through occupancy rates, you know, how popular a building is, depending on how responsible that investor actually is.
Benjamin, are you seeing people investing more in furniture that might cost more, a little bit more for your, you know, recycled and recyclable products, but do they see it as a long-term investment?
It's not just about, do you recycle now? It's about, is your product recyclable? And that's two different things, because we've always recycled everything, but a lot of it's waste to energy. So with the waste to energy stuff, it's not really measurable in terms of what that impact looks like. But if you've got a product that's actually designed to be recycled at the end of its life, whether that's a tabletop or a chair seat or a sofa or a mattress, we're getting asked for us to present products that are sustainable. And, you know, we're trying to keep that within the budgets and within the budget's controls. Yeah, definitely.
Brendan, did you have something that you wanted to add?
No, but that was a bit of a mistake. I pushed the wrong button. But you know, it's a complicated. This is such a complex issue, and there's so many layers to it. And you know, there's no question. Now, my version of what Loft are doing is called life cycle costing, which is about making sure that, you know, the building is more like a circular economy than it is at the moment, which is essentially we replace it if it's broken, and how do we get the longest life out of it. There's so many scales to this debate and so many levels that we need to act on, that I think the furniture side is such a good example of what is possible, and really we should applaud it. The furniture is quick, and we can act on it quickly, and there's lots we can do to measure life cycle, and there's lots we can do to measure sort of social aspects as well, you know, with regards to employing local people to do installations and stuff like that. But, you know, from my perspective, with construction on student and build to rent and co-living, the scrutiny around how these pension funds are investing and how they're building these developments is going to be held in question by the residents. And, you know, you've got the guys like Moda who are very open about what they're trying to do, and are sort of leading the way with transparency, really. I think that it's about data sharing and what is the impact of this building, and how are we going to make it more sustainable with the next building and the next building and the next building.
Just want to change the subject slightly for the next question. So we asked students in our research if they would like to live with environmentally sound people in shared living communities, and more than half said yes, but this isn't something that we've seen people asking in the industry. We quite often ask, do you want to live with males or females, or do you want to live with people who are noisy or quiet, you know, but not really who have sustainable habits. So that we thought that was a really, really positive response, that that's kind of what people want to do. They want to live with other like-minded people. But I guess the question is, as we're talking, predominantly about the rented sector here, how far should the landlord go? How do we not overstep our mark as landlords into, I guess, kind of, shaping communities and habits in buildings? Where does it start and stop?
I think we're in a slightly, as a student accommodation provider, we're in a slightly different position, and we're in probably a more beneficial position, that we are able to, through our behavior change campaigns, which, for example, our residents' life teams run for us, we're able to run campaigns that start to promote behaviors with our residents. I think one of the things which there's a lot of research has been done, and it's interesting that the respondents to your survey had said that they wanted to live with people whose actions were more sustainable. It's always the case, I think, that there's a lot of competitive research where it shows that by measuring your performance against others, you're more likely to be more sustainable. So if you give information which says that somebody over here recycles at this rate, you're more likely to increase your recycling to try and match that person's recycling. And that competitive nature is something that you can use to try to shape behavior. And we're able to do that from a UPP point of view, but it's more difficult where you're in normal sort of residential, whether you're a normal landlord that doesn't have that everyday running that we have at UPP. But I think it's that sort of thing that there's other bits of research that have been done around moments of change, which are for us in terms of, so when can you change somebody's behavior? Can you change a student's behavior when they are first going into accommodation? And I know that we'll get onto this point later on when we talk about, what students pay and combined bills and so on. It's very difficult at the first point of changing behavior when somebody goes into student accommodation if they're paying a combined bill where they don't see the rates that they're paying for their electricity or any of those sorts of things. You're more likely to change that behavior when they come out of student accommodation into into homes with their friends and so on, where they actually see the bills and that sort of thing. So therefore they're more likely to change their behavior. So trying to organize behavior change campaigns, which again, and this goes back to a point that I made earlier on, which triggers them with things that they're interested in, to then try and lead them into other sustainable behaviors, is something that we try to do. But as I say, I think it's easier for us to do as a academic provider, but it's more difficult for your normal residential landlord.
Jason, how do you measure the construction companies that you work with, their commitment to sustainability with building the building? If 39% of global greenhouse emissions are created by construction, then how a resident behaves within the building sort of pales into insignificance when it comes to, like saving the planet. Just wondering what sort of restrictions and sort of tender process you go through with regards to, choosing a company to build one of your student blocks.
Yeah, so two things on that. So one, in terms of, we have a lot of asset transfer. So we have some legacy buildings, which again, the student behavior within those over a period of time, when you think that we are aiming to, well, the UK is aiming to achieve net zero by 2050, the buildings that are going to be around in 2050 have already been constructed and aren't at the point that, the largest proportion of them have already been constructed. So the energy use in those, and by those that are living in them and changing their behaviors, though it's minor compared to the construction element, is very important moving forwards. But in terms of, we will use, the standard accreditations that, around BREEAM and so on. And we're looking at a build at the moment where we're trying to, where what we're being asked for, because we work in partnership with academic institutions, is something such as passive house. And so we would look at designers who have experience of building passive house, building companies who have experience of doing that. We will also be in partnership, and will set sort of a net zero life of the building, but also in terms of, we mentioned embedded sort of embedded carbon per meter squared, those sorts of things. They're the sort of metrics that we would apply to construction. In terms of the constructors themselves, we would look at their, you know, evidence of them having delivered these sorts of projects. So it's a mixture of the two. It's a mixture of experience, and it's also applying specific metrics to the construction itself to enable us to choose who we would work with to deliver our projects.
Just want to go back, Jason, to what you talked about energy there, because that's really relevant, but it's also a little bit contradictory in our research. So maybe you can all help us try and unpick it. So almost half of students said they would consider installing energy meters to track flatmates' usage. So that's what you said about the competitive nature, Jason. But also 81% of respondents said that price is the most important thing when looking at energy providers. So where, you know, that kind of shows how efficient, how impactful the cost is when choosing energy providers for young people. But also, we've got this whole bills included thing, certainly in purpose-built student accommodation and in some build to rent as well. So do you think we need to take a step back and go back to energy metering to make young people more accountable? And is that even possible?
I think that, well, I think energy metering is, and I'm sure that Rosanna would have a very good opinion on this with her experience around property technology and so on, and things like Internet of Things and smart sort of spaces. I think there's individual or unit metering is incredibly useful for us as a provider, because it enables us, we have a portfolio of 36,000 rooms. So it enables us to get an idea of consumption per room. So it enables us to see whether a space, how a particular building or how a particular part of our portfolio is performing. So there's definite value for us in that. But then you get into a bit of a minefield around sharing that information between between tenants and so on, and we need to figure out how best we can use that. But I can definitely see value in that, and I think that as we develop more individual metering of certain bits of kit will be the sort of thing that we'll see within our portfolio, be that around our, the number of fridges that we have. So say, for example, at the end of the year, there's such a churn within academic accommodation. So we have issues where students will be in halls for a period of time, and then they'll go at the end of the year, and then it could be the case, because they have a contract at the end of that year, there could be equipment that is still using energy when those places are vacated. And if we can control that, we can monitor that, and we can see that, and we can use smarter technology to enable us to respond to these things more quickly, that's the way that we have to go.
Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously the data and the tech and the insights is really important, because that can support. I mean, for me, if you've got 81% of your respondents saying that they don't expect to pay higher rates for their energy, then that's a wonderful marketing communications proposition, isn't it, for a building, to say that your energy usage is going to be cheaper within this building, and we're going to save you money because there are these sustainable aspects to the build that we've got, and you have a role to play. I think that often this communication piece, which goes back to bringing our audiences, bringing our customers, bringing the users along with us, and getting them involved in the process is often so missing with regards to marketing and communication. It's kind of telling them one thing and here's the data, but actually the communication is a two-way element. So if you can position it that this building is more sustainable, and therefore it's going to save your money because of the renewable energy or the energies that are used. However, that's provided you do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F as well. It starts to drive behavior change, so that they know that they have a responsibility in the role that they play to get those cheaper bills and the outcome. So it's kind of win-win. So it's not about just giving them the data and tracking it, and it's actually, what do you do with that data? How do you then transition that data insights into something that is meaningful and matters to them? And 80% of people are saying, you know, we don't expect it to be expensive, we want it to be cheaper. Renewable energy can be cheaper, and they can make their own bills cheaper by contributing to different behaviors. And that's all coming back to that education and bringing your audience along with you as part of this, you know, the responsibility not only of you as the proprietor, but of them as the occupant.
I think you've all got lots to say on this one. I think Jason was next with a raised hand.
Mine's very quick, and it's just going back to this point about fully incorporating utilities within one bill. And I think there is a need to be, if we are trying to influence change, and this goes back to the point that I made about moments of change, I think we need to be a little bit more transparent, because this goes back to the point within the research that, yes, that's, you know, in choosing a provider around cost as opposed to the sustainability. I think we just need to be more visible in that. And currently that isn't the case. So you find that behavior isn't affected because you have this one sole invoice that comes in, or bill that comes in, which is for your accommodation inclusive of your energy. And that's something which we need to be more transparent around.
Absolutely. Rosanna.
Sorry, I'm mute. I was just going to, essentially it's agreeing, it's that education piece, it's that handover piece. It's, you know, if one of the biggest barriers to sustainability en masse is consumer behavior, we really need to think about how we do that. And right now, a lot of the time, and I do a lot of work in the residential sector as well, and we talk a lot about retrofit, which is slightly different to this, but we talk a lot about retrofit and people's attitudes towards air source heat pumps instead of gas boilers and things like that. And what we fail to do, again, as an industry, is help give them more information than just a price to make their decision on. And when we do give them that information, it's usually highly complicated and complex, and people go, oh, this is crazy, I want the cheap boiler, because that is the only bit of informed information, or that's the only bit of information I have to make an informed decision from. That's the only way that I can compare. And so once again, it's going back to, you know, we need to be patient. We need to talk to people, you know, Joe blogs on the street, they're not going to know the things that we know. And we have to be really, really responsible in that situation to go, how can we bring this into a realm that they understand and prove to them the long-term value, or where they might be making savings in bills, or how this might affect X, Y, and Z, rather than just going, here's your information, and all they see is the price, and they go, oh, okay, that's the one I want. Like, how are we taking them on that journey?
I think that inflation will affect the way that people make decisions, because values are essentially imaginary. And when coffee becomes £10 a cup in London, people are going to be making different choices. It's not necessarily just going to be a pounds and pence choice. It's going to be what is the impact of my decision? And I think that it's a really interesting point. And I think that this is definitely what I'm seeing from all the young people that work at LOFT. They're making much more conscious decisions that aren't necessarily just about how much am I getting paid or how much does it cost.
Brendan, just need to come off mute.
Yeah, I mean, my point now is really about the product. I mean, the building regulations and the way that we design, and with all the renewable energy potential, suggests that, you know, for a lot of build to rent people, and I suspect it's the same in new build student, it's not worth billing heating. They're so well insulated. The heat that's needed to take it to a comfortable, you know, the in-house heat that's needed to take it to a comfortable level is so small. It's hardly worth the effort of raising your bill for heating. And that's where the industry has moved forward to get the product to perform better. Electricity consumption, on the other hand, is another matter altogether, and that does need to be metered, and there's lots of bad habits around that. And of course, my favorite one is that the contents of your fridge are your biggest source of carbon in the building, because of the air miles probably associated with all that grub flying around the world. So the behavioral point is really important. And even in build to rent, we are finding, at a time when we used to say we'll put underfloor heating in because it's less expensive to run and it's much more efficient from an energy perspective, people didn't want to change. They want to better go a radiator and turn it on. So we started putting in ugly radiators again, because it was just the consumer said no. So there's a really important piece here about, everybody needs to take their responsibility and take it very seriously, but everybody needs to change. That's the one thing that's consistent for all of us, is that change is part of the solution.
Just one quick point on behaviour, really. So on a day when public transport in London has ground to a halt, 74% of our participants said that public transport was the most important sustainable feature. So do we place enough emphasis on travel options and accessibility as part of, I think we need to remember, I guess, from the build industry, we're selling lifestyles, rather than just a room or a flat, and transport is clearly something that's really important to young people. How can we leverage that more?
Bicycles. We did a lot with sponsored bicycles with Quella. We did some stuff with IQ and some stuff with Greystar, and I was at the Footprint conference was really insightful actually in Brighton recently, and the guys from Moda have got bikes that you can sort of hire digitally, and they track how many miles you do, and it's like that becomes part of a leaderboard within the block of who's living, who's the fittest, who's done the most miles on the bike, who's recycled the most, who's used the least energy within their apartment, and the tech is really going to make the change measurable and make the sort of resident behavior more exciting. And I think that you can't rely on the trains or the buses even running on time, even when they are running. So, obviously you can't go from Manchester to London on the train, but certainly within London, it's becoming much more cyclable, and that's definitely more sustainable than catching one of those buses.
Jason.
So to answer the question, in terms of do we put enough emphasis on these other elements such as travel, I would say that we don't. And just to follow up on Ben's point, that's a really good example, and it ties into exactly what we're finding in terms of our behavior change campaigns, that being able to, and the point that I made earlier on, that competitive sort of tying into that competitive urge that we find with students or with young people, and trying to use that to change behavior, I think is a very, very powerful tool.
Rosanna.
I guess my comment is more around why public transport is seen as really important. And I don't think it's down to a sustainability factor. I think it's just down to affordability. Like, a lot of people who are at university, they don't have cars, or they've left their car at home, or they don't have parking spaces. There's never really parking at student accommodation or build to rent, really, not for the tenants. So it makes you question, is this just another one of those cost things? And actually, could we play into the transport aspect of it, the sustainability aspect of the transport hubs, but ultimately are the decisions being made from a cost perspective, again, not from a sustainability perspective?
Michelle, you're nodding. Have you?
I echo that, really, in as much as, again, if these things are important, they're almost the biggest cues, aren't they, to be okay, what do we do about that then? How can we focus on communicating the benefit of this in a way that is sustainable? So again, it might be that they're making those choices because of affordability, but actually, where's the sustainability education around just how much more beneficial it is to be taking the bus than to be grabbing an Uber, or that aspect? And I love the idea about this collaboration of working with other services, that like bike companies or other bus companies, or something collectively where you're bringing communities together with solutions to solve these problems. You know, it doesn't always have to be down to the to the proprietor. It can also be about who do you bring in to collaborate with and create. I mean, there are fantastic apps about recycling. There's the Scrap app, you know, a startup tech company that is teaching people how to recycle well so that there isn't contamination in bins. So why aren't these buildings kind of aligning with those organizations so that the education piece doesn't have to be done by you, it can be done by somebody who's doing it already really successfully. Too Good To Go, a fantastic food waste app. Again, you know, these are apps that are looking to scale and that are in the hands of all of the kind of target audience. So it's about, I think, also about collaboration through education. You know, we don't have to educate everything yourself. It's about who can you be partnering with so that that education piece is more integrated and indeed trusted.
We do need to wrap up in a minute, but Jason and Rosanna, I know you've got something quick that you'd like to add before Deanie wraps up.
Yeah, very quickly, I just wanted to bring Brendan in, really. I'm just getting an idea of what he's seeing from a sort of planning point of view in terms of integration and travel plan, you know, of travel planning and what's being requested. Are developers being asked to, you know, have a more holistic sort of travel plan when they go to planning?
They certainly are. I mean, when I started in architecture, I mean, you had to have 1 or 2 parking bays per unit, and now you have to beg to put a parking bay in. I mean, it really has turned completely 180 degrees. And you know, the only parking bays that we put in now are disabled bays or parking for car clubs or something like that. The bigger issue is actually providing enough drop-off space, because the amount of deliveries to especially block of flats is now off the scale, and having them able to come in and drop off whatever it is and move along. So I think planning has taken that on, and public transport is going to be a big part of that. But there's always a downside. We are asked to put in huge amounts of cycle storage into every new development. I can't speak for every development, but the vast majority of them are not utilized. So that means the pickup by the residents is not as good as it could be. And they get converted back into storage units or whatever it is. But I want to just go back to the consumer here. I mean, I've looked at schemes. We're a bit vanilla with our approach. We need to look at our target market, to the brand we're trying to sell. I mean, if you're selling to nurses and you may be near a hospital and they're doing a peripatetic care where they have to move around, they need car parks. They need them, you know. And if you work down the road, or if there is you're going one direction every day, then of course public transport is an answer. So we need to also blend this with different need across the sector. Certainly Build to Rent will be looking at that.
And Rosanna?
Yeah, I guess my question is to you guys and the research that you've been doing, because in the back of my head, I know that, you know, with talking about costs and how Gen Z are talking about whether they could pay the cost for more sustainable living and stuff, but did you do any research on whether they would perhaps live 15-20 minutes further out of town to be more sustainable than, you know, right in the center of London or something? Would they travel further for sustainability if they can't afford to? Does that make sense? Where does I don't know whether you did any research on that, or because I'd be quite interested.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, really. It was more about cost, that they would be willing to travel further for a reduced rent. So, and that's kind of, I guess, a good place to kind of end the discussion, really, because it is that whole integrated cycle of cost versus sustainability, and young people don't want to pay for it. So all of these fantastic initiatives that we've spoken about today, and I think there's been some really practical solutions to the discussion. At the end of the day, they shouldn't be seen as, I guess, marketable features that would add cost on. They need to just be integrated into the building. But we have covered this in our affordability pillar as well. So Deanie will be giving you some more information on how to stay connected with the rest of our research. I'm going to hand back over.
Well, thank you guys. That was an amazing session. I know I loved it, and I'm pretty sure all our guests did. As Sarah said, and as Rosanna said, we do have a lot more data. We have asked a lot more questions around kind of what people are willing to pay for, and how much they're willing to pay for. So we've got a lot more data to share. So please, the sustainability report, a mini sustainability report, is available to download now from our website. So please go and download that and get that. The next topic we're going to be discussing is community, which is sponsored by CoLive, which will be holding a webinar on the 19th of July, which you can sign up to that now. So please do. Again, there's lots of fascinating information and findings around kind of what young people want around the communities that they live in. And do follow us on our social channels to keep up to date with kind of the news and the research, and as we're releasing it, because we've got a whole 6 months list of things that's coming on over the next 6 months, and we don't want you to miss out. A big thank you to all of our guests today, really insightful, great discussions. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Once again, big thank you to UPP for sharing our vision with us, and also to LOFT to sponsoring this session. Do go into our links and you can find out a great new magazine that LOFT have released, which is worth having a look at. And all the links to kind of the report and the webinars are on the chat. And a big thanks to all our other sponsors, UPP, LOFT, UCAS, APUDOS, and CoLive. And for now, we thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye.